Okay. Okay. So we're starting over. This is week 1 of our 4-week course. Um, again, the goal of this social studies course, we can call it a crash course, to give you everything you need to know in 4 weeks for that GED social studies test or high set social studies test. And I've seen I've talked to all you guys before, so you're familiar with this. So we can just jump right in. Okay. So what are we looking at on the screen here? What's my background? What city do we have there?
Wait, I don't. Are you talking about the city that's right here, like on the picture?
Yeah, my big background picture. What is that?
That is like Washington D.C.
Yeah, it's Washington, D.C. Okay, so in the middle with the big dome, you have the U.S. Capitol building, right?
Right.
And I forget which side is which, but one of the sides is the Senate side, and the other side is the House of Representatives side, so the U.S. Capitol building. And then directly in front of that, there's a bunch of green spaces, like little squares, rectangles. That's what we call the National Mall. And there's like the Smithsonian museums off to the side of that. It's a bunch of, all these buildings are big, important, famous buildings. And then right next to the S of social studies, the tall tower, what is that?
The Washington Monument.
Yeah, exactly. Washington Monument. Okay. Um, the diagonal street that goes from the Capitol building up to the right, you can't see it, but up, that is Pennsylvania Avenue. Up Pennsylvania Avenue is the White House. Okay. So you have the White House at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, just up that road. So I don't know that you can like look down, look out the windows, but really you can see from the White House to the Capitol building. They're basically on the same street. And then I think this on the bottom left, like kind of almost off the picture with the little dome, I think that's the Supreme Court building. Okay, so I like this picture to start us off. It's Washington, D.C., our nation's capital. It's only 3 hours from where I live in central Pennsylvania. Um, within a couple hours, most people in Pennsylvania could drive to D.C. So it's doable. Um, but you have the 3 branches of government. You have a ton of history, kind of encapsulated in that photograph. A lot of history there. Washington, D.C. was started. We'll talk. We'll talk about George Washington being the first president. Now, George Washington didn't live in the White House, but the second president, well, was John Adams. I don't know if he lived in the White House or if they were working on the White House. But as soon as they started the government, when they wrote the Constitution in 1787, they said, well, we need a capital city. So they had the capital. Sometimes it was in Philadelphia, which was a big deal back then. A few years it was in New York City, which was a big city. But they said we need a capital city. This is going to be a big, wonderful nation. We need a capital city, a city devoted to being the nation's capital. And so they created out of nothing. There was no city. There was no such thing as Washington, D.C. It didn't exist. They invented the city of Washington, D.C. to be the capital of our country. And so this was, if this same picture was taken, in 1800, a few years after 1787 with the Constitution, those early 1800s, the only thing there was the Capitol building, and it was much smaller. It was just that middle part, no dome, no wings off the side. It's very small. It was an old, it was a building built in the 1800s, 1700s. So, I don't know that they had indoor plumbing. They didn't have electricity. It was an old fashioned building. And so the city was built as American history unfolded. And you have all the monuments. You have the Washington Monument, the Lincoln Monument behind it. You have the Jefferson Memorial, which is that little dome under the eye in social studies. That white dome is the Jefferson Memorial. So you have in this photograph, I think it's a cool way to start, a lot of history, and of course our whole government is represented there. The three branches of government is right there in one photograph. So I think it's kind of cool. Okay. So today we're going to talk about a little bit of history, how history created, that early history of America created our government. So we're going to talk about that. And then get into the three branches of government. But since today is November 5th, 2020, let's go ahead and I don't want to talk politics per se, but let's talk about the news. And let me jump ahead here in my presentation. Let's go straight to where are we? To the Electoral College. Okay. Because we all know America had our election day Tuesday, 48 hours ago was election day. And so this time, more than ever before, we have a very prolonged, very dragged out election day process, okay, or election process. So does anybody know what the holdup is? Why do we not yet know who the next president will be?
Because states are still counting the absentee ballots.
Right, absentee and mail-in ballots. Okay,
Yeah.
so yeah, up until this year, Pennsylvania, I believe, like most states, had absentee ballots. Okay, it was fairly easy to get one. You just had to apply and say, well, I'm not going to be at home. I'm not going to be in my hometown on election day. So please mail me a ballot and I'll mail it back just because I'm not going to be available to vote. Pennsylvania's always had that. This year, Pennsylvania and several other states, before this pandemic started in February and March, we'd already had the plan in Pennsylvania to have basically no excuse mail-in ballots, which most people think is a good thing. It makes it easier to vote. And you didn't have to say, I'm going to be out of town. It was just no excuse. You just request one. You don't get one automatically. You request it, they mail it to you, you mail it back. What happened is then, and other states did that as well, but every state made their own rules about how that process is going to happen. Pennsylvania's rules was that you couldn't open them and count those mail-in ballots. They've been coming in for a month, but they had to just sit there, and the counties or towns couldn't count those mail-in ballots early. I don't really know why they made that decision, but they couldn't touch them at all, really, until the start of election day. Well, now they've got millions of, Pennsylvania alone has a couple million mail-in ballots that we're now waiting for them to count. And it takes time. Did anybody vote by mail? Anybody see a mail-in ballot this time?
Yes, we did mail-in ballots.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's like the ballot, and then there's a secrecy envelope that you put it in, and then there's the outer envelope, right?
Correct. Yeah.
And there was a lot of directions. You had to sign this, but don't sign that. You had to mark this and put it in the two different envelopes. It was kind of goofy, but doable as long as you follow the directions. Well, now there's like a couple million things, each with two envelopes. That's all folded. You got to flatten it out. I guess that's what really takes time. Then they put them in the machine, and the machine counts the votes. Well, we're waiting, right? The election day in-person voting is easy to count. I actually worked the polls in my town on election day, and I've never done that before. And I was there. I was a person checking people in and helping people vote, and it was really cool. It was cool to see that process in person. But at the end of the night, we had this machine that people had been sticking their ballots in all day. And at the end of the night, you just run the report, and it just, took about 10 minutes, and the machine counted all the votes. It had scanned everything all day, and it just counted the votes and gave us a piece of paper with the results. So the in-person votes are super easy to count on Tuesday. It was done by 10 minutes after we closed the polls. But these in-person ballots are going to take a while. Pennsylvania is going to take the longest. Okay. But let me see if I can. Let me jump to. No, I don't want to do that. Okay, so here on my screen this is live results. This is NBC News. They have a pretty good interface to good map to figure this out. Blue is states that have been declared. Now it's not final yet. It's not official. These are not official results, but it's, they're pretty certain. The NBC News is pretty certain that these states, blue is Democratic, Joe Biden, red is Republican, Donald Trump. The gray ones are ones that still haven't been decided for sure. Okay. Pennsylvania is still coming. North Carolina, Georgia, Nevada, and Arizona. These are the states that we still can't say for sure who's going to win. Okay. But you can see which way the results look to be going. Okay. Nevada, it looks like it's going to go to Biden. He's leading there, and Nevada will probably go to Biden. Arizona looks like it's going to go to Biden, but that's, not too sure. They're still counting a couple 100,000 ballots. Georgia is leaning towards Trump in the results, but look at that, it's very close, 49.6%, 49.2%. North Carolina, pretty close, but it'll probably go to Trump. Pennsylvania looks, in their numbers here, it's 50% to Trump, 48% to Biden. But things are shifting because as those mail-in ballots come in, a lot of those mail-in ballots, I've seen 80% of the people who took the opportunity to mail in the ballots, 80% of those mail-in ballots are Democratic votes for Joe Biden. So the more those come in, the more Biden is catching up to Donald Trump. So we will see. We will see how this unfolds. It could happen. They may declare it today, probably not. Maybe Friday, maybe beyond. I don't know. The important thing is that they're all counted, right? There's a pile, we could say there's a pile of votes cast. All the mail-in ballots, the in-person ballots, there's a big pile. So you just have to wait till they're all figured out, which takes time. We knew it was going to take time. People have been saying, the news has been saying for weeks that we weren't going to know Tuesday night for sure, most likely. And so we just, we wait, and people are doing their jobs. And what we're waiting for then is the Electoral College to happen. So let me get back to my PowerPoint here. Okay, here we go. So let me get back to the where are we? The Electoral College. Okay. On the left-hand side and the right-hand side, but the left-hand side more clearly, is the number of electoral votes for each state. Okay. Now, a couple of you, I know we've discussed this before, but let's just go over it again, because this is the week we want to understand this. All right, so every state has a different number of electoral votes. America, growing up, I always thought we were always told that the winner of the election is the person with the most votes, right? That's what you think. But that's true in every case except this one thing. When the guys we call the founding fathers, when they wrote the Constitution, they made the Electoral College a different kind of system to elect the president. And I think the thinking was back then, if you're sitting in, if you're a Pennsylvanian, or say you're down south in South Carolina, in the year 1800, you're not going to necessarily know much about the presidential candidates that year. If it's somebody from Massachusetts and somebody from New York, you're not going to be familiar with them. So it's going to be hard for you to make a wise, knowledgeable, educated decision on two candidates that you don't know them very well. So what they do is, when you vote for president, you're actually voting for electors, actual people, and this is true today. You're voting for actual people, electors, 20 for Pennsylvania, as you see on the map there. And those people, now picture back then in the 1700s, 1800s, those are pretty political people. They're plugged into the system. They're going to know, they're sitting down there in South Carolina, let's say, they're going to know something about those national candidates, a guy from Massachusetts and a guy from New York. They're going to be more knowledgeable. So you're going to entrust me as a citizen, I'm going to entrust my decision to that elector, and he's going to make an educated, informed decision. Okay. Now, today, that's not true. We all know plenty about our national candidates, right? We're familiar with Donald Trump. We're familiar with Joe Biden. Or if you're not, you just got to do a Google search and you can find out everything you could ever want to know, right? So we don't live in that world that the Electoral College was created for. So some people say, well, the Electoral College needs to go. I don't see it going anywhere anytime soon. But the way it works is every state has that number of electoral votes. And so we vote in Pennsylvania. We do take all the votes across Pennsylvania, central Pennsylvania mixed with which tends to be very Republican, central Pennsylvania, those rural parts of the north and the middle and the corners and everything. You mix those very Republican rural counties and areas. You mix them with the very Democratic city counties, Philadelphia and Pittsburgh and Allegheny County. And you mix it all together, you put them all in a pot, and then the winner of all those votes gets all 20 of Pennsylvania's electoral votes. So now let me get back. There we go. Okay. So we have, they have said that this is, Ohio is going to Trump. Well, Ohio gets 18 electoral votes. New York is because of New York City largely, New York is very Democratic leaning. And so Joe Biden got 29 electoral votes from New York. Nevada has 6, Arizona has 11, Georgia has 16, that's a lot. North Carolina has 15, and Pennsylvania is the biggest prize that's left. Of those 5 remaining states that we don't quite know who won yet, Pennsylvania is the biggest. If Joe Biden wins Pennsylvania, he's there. He's the president. Because if you add up what he does have so far, Washington, Oregon, California, Colorado, New Mexico, and all the blue, all their electoral college votes, Joe Biden is sitting at 253. Donald Trump, if you add up all the states that we know, we're, pretty darn certain that Donald Trump won that state's vote. He's sitting at 214. Now, there are 538 electoral votes. You could have a tie of 269 to 269, which happens, I think it's happened once or maybe twice, hasn't happened very recently. And so we're not, if there's a tie, this whole other thing happens and whatever, but we're not worried about that. So 270 to win, that's why we got, this little line here, 270. If you get 270 votes, that means the other person has 268 or less, okay? And so you win. So it's a race to 270 votes. Well, right now Biden has 253. If he wins the 20 of Pennsylvania, he gets 273 and he's president. Okay. If Trump wins Pennsylvania, Biden could still win if he gets Nevada and Arizona, or so you're mixing these numbers. It just becomes a math game. Okay. The Electoral College, once the election results start coming in on Tuesday night, it just becomes a math game. How, what states can you add up to get 270 or more? Okay. Okay. So given all of that, given the news, do you guys have any questions about what's going on right now or how the Electoral College works or anything?
I don't have a question, but I do have a comment. Google and Bing has their supposedly live updated map, and
Yeah.
it says that Arizona went to Biden. And
Some, yeah, some people are giving Arizona to Biden. NBC News, this is just the one map I'm looking
yeah,
at. What you see here is Biden has 50.5% of the vote. Trump has 48.1%. And now you see, now I can't point because if I move my thing, but the top corner of that white box for Arizona, it says 86% in. That means they've collected or counted 86% of the vote. So some, I think the Associated Press, I forget, there's all these different news things. Some have given Biden Arizona, and some people haven't. It looks like, just NBC News that I'm looking at hasn't given Biden Arizona yet. It looks like he might. I was reading a news blog earlier that the votes that are left to count in Arizona will probably favor Biden as well. So he probably will win. And it looks like Biden will win Arizona. But, we can't. Some people are saying, yeah, let's go for it. Let's say he's good. And other people are saying, well, I'm going to wait. We'll wait on that. So, yeah. But definitely Pennsylvania is really the big one, and it's a big question mark. It's very close, and there's still a couple hundred thousand, several hundred thousand mail-in ballots that are still being counted. Trump had a big lead. I think it was 54% to 43%. Trump had a big lead at the end of election night, late Tuesday night. And as they count more mail-in ballots, Biden is closing that lead. And some people are saying Biden may surpass Trump as they count, by the final count of the mail-in ballots. So it's interesting to see. It's interesting to see how this whole process really unfolds. Now, depending on who you want to win, it can be good news, it can be bad news, but we should all want all the votes to be counted, right? And it may seem unfair, like, oh, it looked like my guy was winning and now my guy lost that state, but that's not actually how it happens. What we're doing is there's a giant, as in my mind, I picture every state has a giant pile of votes, and you just have to wait until that whole pile is counted. And as the numbers come through, it looks like this person's winning, it looks like that person's winning, but you got to wait till the end. You got to wait till the final, that last vote is counted, and then you'll know who the real winner is. It's like a basketball game. You may be winning with 30 seconds left, but that doesn't matter. What matters is when the time's up at the end of the game, who's winning then? So, and yeah, that's a good point though. And it's interesting to see.
I was gonna say, did you vote?
I did vote. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I volunteered to be a poll worker, and my county. I'm in Blair County, in the middle of the state, and my county got back to me. It was real easy. I applied online, and they're happy to take volunteers. It doesn't take, you don't have to be a genius to do it. I'm certainly not, but I volunteered, and then I was put not in my. I mean, every town has like a couple of districts, a couple of precincts, they're called, different areas that vote. I wasn't assigned to the precinct I live in. I was like one precinct over, it's just, down the road really. So I was working all day, but then I did want to go vote. I hadn't voted by mail, so I did want to go vote. So I had to leave and go to this other place where I'm supposed to vote. And it was really interesting to see that whole process unfold. Um, how votes are cast, and there's big lists, books of people's names, and people would come in and their names would be there, and then they sign, or their names weren't there, and so that means you're not registered to vote in that precinct. Maybe people moved recently and they hadn't done their address thing. So I'd get on the phone with, or somebody else would get on the phone with the voter registration office, and we'd say, oh, I got this person here, here's his name, where does he need to vote? And they'd tell us, and we'd send them out the door. Because if you're not on our list, you're not voting there. You got to go to the place where you are in the book. So it's pretty cool. So any other questions about the how this works or the news today? What's going on?
Real quick, could you explain Nebraska and Maine's Electoral College? I was looking somewhere. I
Yeah.
believe that like Nebraska would give one electoral vote to Mr. Biden and three to Mr. Trump, and Maine would be split. So can you kind of
Yeah.
explain
So
that?
Nebraska, first of all, let me say there's not a lot of people in Nebraska and there's not a lot of people in Maine. So these aren't the most important things, although this time if it comes down to a real close race, they may be important. Every state, like Pennsylvania, we take all the votes across Pennsylvania, put them in a pile, and we count them. And then the winner of Pennsylvania gets all 20 electoral votes for Pennsylvania. Every state does it that way, winner take all of the whole state, except Nebraska and Maine. Maine, there's not a lot of people in Maine, and so they have two different districts in Maine. There's two senators. Every state has two senators, and there are two representatives, House of Representatives, in Maine. So basically, Maine is cut in half, and one representative represents the eastern part, and one representative represents the western part. Those two halves kind of operate as separate states in the Electoral College. So the Western Maine and Eastern Maine, the Western Maine will assign 2 electoral votes to whoever wins that part of Maine, and the other half of Maine will assign 2 electoral votes to whoever wins that half. So Maine works as 2 halves of the state. I think Joe Biden won both of those areas. Okay. Now this on the right-hand side, I made this weeks ago. On the right-hand side here, this is my presentation. I'm not looking at the website. So this is 2016's map. Okay. And I should have put that a little more clearly. Well, after this election, I can update it with the new map. But this is the 2016 map. So it looks like Maine in 2016. I don't know which was which, but one half of Maine went for Clinton, one half of Maine went for Trump. Nebraska does it the same way, but I don't know if I think they do like half the state and half the state. Nebraska is the same way. So Maine and Nebraska are the only two states that might, if need be, break up or separate their electoral votes. Again, it usually doesn't matter because Nebraska has 5, Maine has 4. So if you win half of Maine, you get 2. Normally it doesn't come down to 2 votes, right? Trump beat Clinton by 74 electoral votes we see on this map. So 2 doesn't really matter. But yeah, Maine and Nebraska are a little bit different. Well, they're very different than every other state. Every other state, including Pennsylvania, gives all their electoral votes to whichever candidate won the state. Maine and Nebraska do it separately. It's a good question. Normally it doesn't matter, but it might this time. You don't know. And I think, well, let's go back to NBC. Nebraska we're giving it right now 6 electoral votes, although maybe my map's bad. 6 electoral votes are going to Trump, and both parts of Maine went to Biden, according to this. Okay. Good question. Any other questions? Olubakimi, thank you for logging in. I see you there. Any other questions about the Electoral College or the news? Okay. Well, let's jump back in here. Okay. So let's dial it back here a couple hundred years, and let's look at how this system came to be. Okay. I think when you're studying civics and government, it's good. I think it's more interesting, certainly, and it's good to see the history that our current government came out of, right? Because they invented our type of government way back when. They invented it. They came up with this. They sat in a room. They came up with these ideas. They made these decisions for a certain reason. And to understand their reasoning, you need to look at who they were, like the times they were living in historically. Okay, so let's dial the clock way back. 1607, we have Jamestown, Virginia, down in Jamestown, Virginia, founded by British colonists. So, of course, Native Americans have been living in North America for thousands of years. But then you have the British come over, and you have the explorers. You have Christopher Columbus, 1492, good long time before Jamestown, Virginia, 1607. 1492, Columbus sails the ocean blue. That's what I was always told. So 1492, Columbus, and then shortly after him, a bunch of explorers. Okay, so the British, when they came to the and set up colonies in the land they called America, it wasn't the United States of America, but it was the land they called America. They weren't exploring, they weren't discovering for themselves. They were exploring, but they weren't discovering. Okay, so we can make a distinction there. So 1607, they set up a town, and then it expands from there as people come over on boats. And same thing happens. 1620, Plymouth, Massachusetts, founded by the British, coming on the Mayflower. It's November now. Who were those people? What do we call those people who came over on the Mayflower? To Plymouth, Massachusetts.
Pilgrims.
Yeah, those are the people we call the Pilgrims. Okay, 1620. When they came, they were met with a whole society of Native Americans who they had to make friends with, and then eventually they kind of made enemies with. But for about 50 years, the Pilgrims who landed, and then a whole bunch of other boats came too, in Plymouth, Massachusetts, for about 50 years, they were very friendly, working cooperatively with the Native American population there. So 1607 to 1732, over that time, you have the original 13 colonies set up by the British. They were British colonies in America. They called this land America. It wasn't the United States of America. It wasn't a country, but it was the land they called America. Okay, and we have that list right underneath. Those are the colonies and the date they were founded. Okay, Pennsylvania became a colony in 1681. And they're British colonies. Okay, so if you lived in Pennsylvania in 1681, you would have celebrated that your land had become a British colony. You were British. You were British. But during the 1700s, especially the second half of the 1700s, those British colonists in America were starting to view themselves as not quite British. They knew they were different than like the British people living over in London and in England and in Britain. They started to view themselves as like, yeah, they're British, but they're like, well, we're different than them, right? We live over here. My grandparents, my great-grandparents were over in America. I'm not like those people over in London, in England. So they started to form their own identity. You have the French and Indian War, which it says the British beat the French and Indians on the same side. The British beat them for control of Eastern North American colonies. That's in the 1750s, 1760s. 1750s to 70s, the British government levies several taxes on the American colonies. You have the Stamp Act, the Sugar Act, the tea tax. And so the American colonists, we'll call them Americans, they had their own identity. They knew they were different. They felt different than those British people. And they also started to think, man, the British, if we call them British, and London, they don't treat us well. We should be be running our own affairs more than be under the charge of somebody over in London 1,000 miles away across an ocean. So not only did they have their own identity forming in their mind over this time, but they wanted to be in charge of their own lives. They wanted to run their own country. And so you have the Boston Massacre, 1770. That's what this old picture is from. Okay, British soldiers shot some kind of protesting, kind of rioting colonists. You have the Boston Tea Party, where American protesters dumped tea into Boston Harbor to protest the British tea tax. There was a very high tax they didn't like. So their money is going to the government in London instead of staying in America. And so it comes to the point where 1776 they declare independence. A group they called the Continental Congress, all the leaders from all the different colonies were illegally meeting in Philadelphia, and they adopted the Declaration of Independence. We're going to look at that in a minute. They declared their independence, right? They said, we don't want to be part of Britain anymore. We want to be an independent nation. And they called themselves the United States of America. Okay. Britain said no, right? Britain's not going to let the colonies become a new country. And so they fought a war, the Revolutionary War between Great Britain and the American colonies, 1775 to 1783. During that war, before it's even decided, before we had even beaten the British and become their own country, they're like, hey, forget it. We are our own country. We're going to start acting like it, even as they're fighting a war to decide whether or not they're going to be British anymore. So the Continental Congress adopts what is our first government, what they call the Articles of Confederation. Okay, not the most important thing, but it was our first government. They had designed a government. It wasn't the government we have today. It's different. It was a very loose attachment among all the colonies, states. Every state the states were very powerful. The national government was not very powerful under this first system, the Articles of Confederation. Well, they did it for about 10 years, and they said, well, you know what, this isn't working. We need a more powerful central government to tie all the states together. Some things are best done as a whole group of states instead of one by one states. And so they went back to the drawing board. 1787, they wrote the U.S. Constitution, forming our modern government. Okay, the government we have today that we'll talk about. Well, they created this government. They said, okay, this is same country, new government, but we need these 13 states to agree to it. And so over a period of a couple of years, by 1790, all 13 states individually, one by one, had agreed to ratify or agree to this new constitution, the new government. And then 1791, we have the Bill of Rights is adopted. We're going to talk about that. Okay. So that's the early history. Within that historical context, you have our modern today's government being created. I think to understand our modern government, you have to understand the people who made that government and the time they were living in and the decisions that they made. Okay. So 1776, they signed the Declaration of Independence. Could somebody read this paragraph for us? Now, let me say, this is the original. This is how it starts. It's a very long document, but this is the beginning of it. And it's your classic old document. Very long sentences, kind of hard to read, kind of hard to make sense of. But what we're gonna see that if you take your time, you can actually make sense of it pretty well. Okay, so does somebody want to read this for us?
I can do that.
Okay.
We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights,
Unalienable.
unalienable rights. That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, driving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government.
Okay. So long sentence. There's a couple of, well, I think that is, well, maybe two sentences. So, but let's break it down and see what it says. So what happens is these old documents, the sentences are really long, but you just have to take your time, understand it as it goes. Okay. Normally the way we talk, especially, just casual talking, every sentence has like one idea in it, right? Like if you take everything I've said and if you wrote it all out, every sentence is basically saying one thing. The way these guys write, every sentence is saying a couple of different things. So let's break it down and see. And to do that, um, you have to take it piece by piece. So we hold these truths to be self-evident. Okay, these truths, these things I'm about to say are true, and they should be self-evident. They should be obvious to everybody. Okay, now this is a list that it's a list of ideas, truths, and they all start with that. Okay, so if, we could look at where are all the that's. Actually, let me do that. Let me pull up do I have, okay. That all men are created equal. Let's do this. I'll circle the that's. Okay, so this is a list of truths that they think are self-evident. That all men are created equal. Okay, it's an idea. That they, the men, are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. That, oh, I missed one. That among these rights that every person has are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. The purpose of government is to protect our natural rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's why you and I agree to form a government, is because I feel safer in a world that has government than in a world that doesn't, if we were just all on our own. Okay. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends of securing life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, if your government isn't doing that, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute new government. Okay. If your government is not protecting life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, is not doing its job that we as humans all agree government is supposed to do, then you change your government. Now, consider what we're reading. We're reading the Declaration of Independence. And so the purpose is to list, what comes after this in the Declaration of Independence is a list of complaints about the government in London and the king. Okay. It's actually just a long list of complaints. And then at the end, they make the argument because of this king, the King of England is not, is doing such a bad job and is not protecting our life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, we are going to break away and we are declaring independence and are our own nation. Okay, that's what this document is doing. So this first paragraph is laying out the reason that all men are created equal, all men are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. It's the purpose of government to protect those rights. And when your government isn't protecting those rights, you should form a new government. Okay, so it's pretty easy to understand, and it certainly makes sense to me. And so when you read a document, you got to think, okay, yeah, these sentences are long, but what is being said here? And you got to think, what is the purpose of this document? Okay, if you're reading an old document like this, or you're reading, they give you a letter or a news article, whatever you read on the test, you got to think, what am I reading? What's the purpose of this document? Okay. The purpose of this is to declare independence from England. All right. Then they wrote, they did the Articles of Confederation government. That wasn't so good. So they came back and they wrote the US Constitution, which gives us our modern government today. And so here we are at the beginning of the US Constitution. That's what we have here. We the people. You've probably heard, we the people. It's the preamble, the introductory paragraph of the US Constitution. Again, it looks long. This is one long sentence, but we'll break it down and we'll see that it's not all that confusing. So it says, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice. Okay, again, we're looking at a list. In order to do this, 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 and this, this is what's being said. We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Posterity is like post, people that come after you, like your children, grandchildren. In order to do those things, we do ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States. So the preamble, as we see here in color, okay, we the people of the United States, in order to do these things in green, do ordain and establish the Constitution. That's the purpose. They're saying the purpose of this Constitution that you're about to read, right? If you're reading the preamble, is to do those things. Okay, so think about our government, and it's meant to do these things: form a more perfect union, a union of the states, establish justice. Okay, or we have a government to bring justice to all people, to ensure domestic tranquility, to get the states to get along, provide for the common defense, right? We have an army and stuff like that. Promote the general welfare. We have, keeps people safe, helps the economy run smoothly, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, right? Liberty, we vote, we have freedom. Okay, that's the purpose of the government that is described in the Constitution. And this is the first paragraph of the US Constitution. Okay, so those are two pretty important ones. You want to be familiar with, we hold these truths to be self-evident, the Declaration of Independence, and we the people, and the preamble of the Constitution. Okay. After they wrote the Constitution, in the Constitution, they made a way to fix problems. Okay, they wrote the Constitution. They knew that something was going to happen someday. Things were going to change, no doubt. But as the country changes, you need to have a way to change this document. So they wrote a way to amend it. Right away, they wrote the first 10 amendments and they grouped them together, and we call it the Bill of Rights. So it says the Bill of Rights are the first 10 amendments to the US Constitution. They were signed and ratified, which means passed by the states, immediately after the Constitution took effect. They focus heavily on the rights of individuals and especially the rights of people accused of crimes in the new nation. So this is what you see on the screen in the blue, Amendment 1, Amendment 2, and Amendment 3. That is it. That is the entire text of the First Amendment, Second Amendment, Third Amendment. So we're just looking at these three as an example, but very short, right? Not a ton of information here, which some people would say, well, it would have been nice if they'd given us a few more details about what they meant. And yeah, probably that would have been helpful. But it's pretty short and pretty clear. This is easy to understand sometimes. So the First Amendment says these are things you should be familiar with. Congress shall make no law respecting. Now, respecting, it doesn't mean respect. It means like about, regarding. Okay, shall make no law about the establishment of religion. We don't have a national religion. Some people say we are a Christian nation because a lot of people are Christian and a lot of Americans through history have been Christian, but we are not a officially Christian nation. Some countries do or have in the past had national religions. We've never had a national religion. Okay, no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. We have the freedom of speech, freedom of the press. We can peaceably assemble, we can protest, we can petition the government, we can ask for the redress of grievances, fixing of problems. Okay. Big ones there, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, right? We hear about those the most. Second Amendment, people hear about the Second Amendment all the time. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Okay, now you think back then, what was the world like? They didn't have a national army. They had put together an army to fight the British in the Revolutionary War, but after the Revolutionary War, the army was done. They went home. So they did not have what we have today, what you call a standing army. How many millions of people are in our United States military today? We are at war in some places, but there's also a lot of people in the military that are not fighting in wars right now. We have a standing army. Back then, they did not have a standing army. If your town became attacked by the British, by Native Americans, by whatever, all the men generally in town would grab their guns and form a militia. Right? That's not how we do things today. We have an American army. Every town doesn't have their own little militia. But back then they did. And so in order for those men to be ready to form the town's militia, you needed to keep and bear arms, right? Guns. So that right shall not be infringed. So you got to think, what was the world like when they wrote this? What were they thinking? And then you got to think, well, does that apply today? Is the world still like that? Now, Amendment 3, nobody's ever talking about Amendment 3. This is a very specific thing in history. No soldier shall in time of peace be quartered or be allowed to be in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by law. When the British were here, they would sometimes knock on your door at night and say, we're taking over your house. We're going to sleep in your house tonight. British soldiers, right? They would take over, they would commandeer your house. And you'd have to, I guess, cook them dinner and breakfast and whatever. So that's not something we worry about anymore. Nobody ever complains about the Third Amendment anymore. Not a concern. So let's finish this, and then we'll stop here with the Bill of Rights. So the first 10 amendments to the U.S. Constitution. I just found this. I thought the picture is pretty old-fashioned. It says 1971 here, but it's an interesting way to look. So the first 10 amendments mostly focus on people who are accused of crimes. Okay, so First Amendment, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, press, assembly, and freedom of petition. Okay, Second Amendment, right to bear arms. Third Amendment, quartering soldiers. We talked about, we're not worried about that anymore. Now, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 are really about the justice system, which tells you something about what were these people, what were these men who wrote the Bill of Rights, what were they concerned about? What were the problems that they had with the British? This is what they were concerned about. Fourth Amendment, unlawful arrests and searches. The police just can't knock on your door and ask to search your house. Or when you're pulled over for speeding, they can't ask you to open your trunk and look for drugs or something, unless they have reason to believe, they see drugs on your back seat or something, right? So we are protected by the Fourth Amendment against unlawful searches and seizures. The Fifth Amendment are different. There's a couple things in the Fifth Amendment. They're rights of people accused of crimes. Okay, you don't have to testify against yourself in court. Okay, there's a couple things in the Fifth Amendment. I'm no expert. Sixth Amendment, rights of persons on trial for crimes. You have a jury trial. They can't try you. You can't have a trial without you being there, right? If you're accused of a crime, you have to be told of that. You have the right to appear in court, because under the British system, they could have a trial without you even knowing about it. And then, of course, you never get to defend yourself. So this is what they're protecting against. Seventh Amendment, jury trials in civil cases. If you're going to sue somebody for money, it's in front of a jury. Eighth Amendment, limitations on bail and punishments. If somebody speeds in their car, you can't kill them, you can't execute them, right? So it has to fit the crime. The punishment has to fit the crime. That's the Eighth Amendment. Ninth Amendment, 10th Amendment, a little bit different. It specifies any other rights that people have are kept by the people, and powers that aren't specifically in the Constitution are kept by the states or by the people. That's a little bit kind of different than all the other ones. Okay, so the Bill of Rights were the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. Okay, we'll go ahead and stop there. We talked a good bit about the Electoral College, so next week we won't have to talk about the Electoral College, but I definitely wanted to cover that as we, let's jump to that again, as we watch the news. And next week, when we talk next Thursday, I'm thinking by next Thursday we will know who to expect to be the next president. But it's interesting to see this unfold, and it's especially when you consider all the history that is tied up in why our government is the way it is, and the system that even the Electoral College. Okay, so watch the news. People are pretty crazy about things, but watch the news. It's interesting to see this unfold, certainly. So I know we covered a bunch. We'll continue next week, and we'll keep going. Any questions about anything? Anything at all? Okay. Well, then I'll see you next week. I'll email out I'll send this recording. I'll send this document out to you. You can look it over. And I hope to talk to you guys next Thursday then.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Okay. Bye.
All
Bye.
right. Have a great day.
Bye. Have a good day.
Have a great week.